My sister called me dead weight until she learned I owned the entire shop. So, I guess this is the part where I finally say it out loud. Something I've been swallowing for years because it just felt easier to pretend everything was fine. But last month, something happened that shook me so hard I'm still trying to make sense of it. And honestly, if I don't put it into words, I feel like I'm going to choke on the truth. My name is Lauren Bennett. I'm 32, I live in a small apartment outside Columbus, Ohio, and I've basically been the responsible one since I was old enough to understand what overdue bills meant. My mom likes to say I was born steady, which is her polite way of saying I'm the one who keeps fixing every mess this family makes. My little sister, Savannah, oh, she was the golden one. The one with the big smile, big dreams, and even bigger expectations that everyone else would pay for them. Growing up, I was invisible isn't the right word. More like background furniture. Necessary, useful, always there. But no one really looks at it unless they need something. Whenever Savannah wanted new cleats, a new dress, a new hobby, whatever, my parents scrambled to make it happen. But when I wanted something, well, the answer was almost always, Lauren, you're tougher than your sister. You can wait. She's more sensitive. It took me years to realize they weren't praising my strength. They were excusing their neglect. I wish I could tell you it got better when I became an adult. But the truth? It just got more sophisticated. Instead of school fees and after-school programs, it became Savannah's rent when she couldn't deal with roommates, her car repairs after yet another late-night bar run, her business venture that turned out to be 3 months of yoga instructor classes before she got bored. And me? I worked. God, did I work. I climbed my way into a decent logistics coordinator job at a distribution center, pulling 60-hour weeks on a good month. My coworkers joked that I lived on coffee and spite. They weren't entirely wrong. Bills don't pay themselves, and apparently neither do grown siblings. Still, I told myself it was just how family worked. You help each other, you sacrifice, you push through, you don't complain. That's what I grew up believing. But then came the Sunday that cracked everything open. It was the last week of quarter end at the warehouse, and we were short-staffed. I'd been running on maybe 8 hours of sleep total in the past 3 days. My eyes twitched every time I looked at a screen. But I pushed through because that's what I do. That's what everyone expects me to do. I remember sitting at my desk, going through shipping errors, and for one split second I felt the room tilt, just a little, like someone kicked the floor under me. I blinked hard, grabbed my coffee, and told myself I'd be fine. I always am. Only this time I wasn't. The next thing I remember is this weird, muffled beeping. You ever wake up from a dream where everything feels underwater? That's what it was like. Except when I opened my eyes, I wasn't underwater. I was in the ICU at Riverside Hospital with an oxygen tube in my nose and a nurse saying my name like she wasn't sure I'd answer. Apparently, I'd collapsed at my desk. Full system shutdown, dehydration, exhaustion, heart arrhythmia. The kind of thing the body only does when you've ignored every warning sign it's been screaming at you for months. And this is the part I still can't decide is funny or tragic. The first thing I did when I woke up wasn't ask what happened, or if I was okay, or where I was. I reached for my phone. Not because I expected love. I think some part of me just hoped. Maybe my mom had texted. Maybe Savannah. Maybe someone noticed I was gone for a day. When my fingers finally closed around my phone, the screen lit up. Fully charged. Untouched. No missed calls. No messages. No "are you okay?" No "where are you?" Nothing. Except one text from my mom. Sent at 7:11 a.m., exactly 4 hours after the paramedics took me from work. It said, Savannah needs help covering her deposit. Send $3,500 by tonight. Not even a hi. Not even my name. Just a dollar amount, like I was a bank app. And here's the part I still feel stupid saying out loud. I sent it. Right there in that bed, with my chest still tight and my arms bruised from IV lines, I opened my banking app and transferred the money. It wasn't logic. It wasn't responsibility. It was reflex. The same muscle memory you have when you reach for your seatbelt or turn off a stove burner. My whole life had trained me to say yes before my brain even processed the question. A nurse walked in just as I hit confirm, And she looked at me like she knew exactly what kind of person I was. The kind who gives until they break, then apologizes for breaking. I don't know why, but that look hit harder than the collapse itself. When I was discharged 2 days later, still weak and dizzy, I ordered an Uber home. The driver, a middle-aged guy named Ron, kept cracking jokes about the weather, and I forced a smile here and there. At one point he said, "You okay back there? You look like you've had one hell of a week." I almost laughed. If he only knew. I thought walking into my apartment would help me breathe again. I thought home would mean peace. But the moment I opened the door, the air felt wrong, too still, too quiet. Then I saw it. On my hallway mirror, in bright pink lipstick, the shade my sister always wears, were 4 words. "Hurry up next time." For a second, my brain didn't register it. Then my heart dropped so fast it felt like someone pulled the floor out from under me. It wasn't just a message. It was a reminder, a command, a slap. As if collapsing wasn't fast enough for them. As if my near-heart failure was an inconvenience. As if I owed them more. I stood there, staring at those words, feeling everything and nothing at the same time. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to laugh. But mostly I just felt tired. Bone-deep, soul-deep tired. I guess that's the moment something inside me finally cracked. Not loud, not dramatic. More like a quiet click. Like a lock turning from the inside. For the first time in my life I thought, what if I just stop? Stop paying. Stop fixing. Stop being whatever version of myself they needed. Stop carrying people who never once looked down to see what I was standing on. That was the moment the story you're about to hear truly began. Not in the ICU, not at my apartment door, but right there, in front of that stupid mirror, reading those stupid words written by someone who hadn't asked me how I was in years. And trust me, they had no idea who they had just woken up. I wish I could tell you that after reading that lipstick message, I packed my bags, slammed the door, and never looked back. That would make me sound strong, right? Like some badass heroine who suddenly grows wings and flies out of her misery. But the truth is a lot less glamorous. I just stood there, staring at that mirror, and for a solid minute, I couldn't feel my own hands. It was like someone unplugged me from myself. When I finally blinked back into reality, the first thing I did was wipe the message off. Not because I forgave them, but because I couldn't stand seeing my own reflection next to those words. I looked tired. Not, I didn't sleep enough tired. More like, my soul needs a nap tired. I sat on the edge of my couch, still wearing the hospital wristband, and for the first time in my entire adult life, I didn't pick up the phone to call my mom. Normally I'd tell her I made it home okay, that the doctor said I needed rest, maybe hope she'd frown a little and say something like, "You have to take better care of yourself, honey." But I already knew what would happen instead. She'd say, "Good. Now, about that bill Savannah can't handle." So I didn't call. I just breathed, or tried to. Breathing hurts when you realize you've been drowning on land for years. The next morning I woke up to 12 texts from my mom and 6 from Savannah, all variations of, "Did you send the money?" and "Why aren't you picking up?" Not a single, "How are you feeling?" I could practically hear Savannah's voice through the screen, dramatic sighs, flipping her hair like the world was ending because her convenience was interrupted. Usually that tone triggered my panic switch, the one that made me drop everything to fix whatever crisis she invented. But this time, something inside me stayed still. It was unsettling, honestly, like feeling an earthquake and suddenly realizing you're not scared of it anymore. I made myself breakfast, which felt like a rebellious act, then opened my laptop and started going through my bank statements. I didn't have a plan yet. I just needed to see the truth in front of me, black and white, not softened by excuses or family comes first. Page after page, month after month, the pattern was ridiculous. Transfers labeled, help, emergency, just this once. I could practically map out Savannah's life choices through my withdrawals. And it hit me. I had been funding someone else's storyline while mine was stuck on pause. Later that afternoon, I drove to the warehouse to bring in my medical paperwork. HR had left a little "get well soon" card on my desk, signed by everyone except my supervisor Todd, who probably didn't even know I'd collapsed because he's the kind of manager who only notices you when the numbers dip. When I leaned over to pick up the card, the temp working the station next to mine, a kid named Miguel, looked at me and said, "We were scared when they took you out, you know. Thought something really bad happened." His face was so sincere that, for a moment, I felt warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It's weird when a near stranger cares more than the people you've fed for years. On the way back to my car, I ran into our night shift driver, Old Man Harris. He's one of those guys who sees everything but never makes a fuss. He stopped me by the vending machines, handed me a bottle of water, and said, "You gotta stop running your engine on fumes, kid. Even good machines break." Then he winked and shuffled off. And I know it sounds cheesy, but I swear that sentence cracked something open in me. Maybe because it came from someone who wasn't asking me for anything. It made me realize how starved I was for basic kindness. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I recorded a conversation with my mom. I didn't mean to at first. I'd accidentally hit the record button while picking up the call, but when I heard her tone shift the moment I mentioned the hospital, something inside me told me to let it run. She barely paused before steering the conversation back to Savannah's needs, even scolding me for being dramatic about collapsing. "You've always been too sensitive, Lauren," she said, like the phrase wasn't absurd. I felt this coldness crawling up my spine, not anger, not yet, just clarity. After we hung up, I re-listened to that recording. Twice. Hearing it from the outside was like watching someone else's toxic family on those reality shows you swear you'd never end up in. Except I had, and it had become normal. That's when I decided to start collecting everything. Old texts, voicemails, emails, all the little moments I'd brushed aside because it was easier to pretend they didn't sting. I bought a small binder from Target, blue, with little constellations on the cover, because for some reason that felt hopeful, and began printing out my bank statements. I even labeled the pages like some messy, emotionally unhinged accountant. But weirdly, it didn't feel unhinged. It felt like regaining consciousness. I'd never noticed how many times Savannah used phrases like, "You're the only one I can count on," or "Mom says you don't mind helping," or the classic, "If you really loved me." And my mom? She had mastered guilt-tripping like it was an Olympic sport. Hearing it all compiled, written out, made it impossible to lie to myself anymore. One night, while sorting through messages, my dad FaceTimed me. And that alone was strange, because he almost never calls unless Mom tells him to. He looked tired, leaning back in his recliner, clutching a beer he probably didn't need. "Your mother says you've been ignoring us," he said. No greeting, no concern, just a statement loaded with accusation. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I said, "Dad, I was in the ICU." He blinked slowly, like he didn't know how to process that. Then he said, "Yeah, your mom mentioned you fainted or something." Fainted, right. A whole 48 hours in the ICU, reduced to the same category as a teenager passing out at cheer practice. I studied his face through the screen, tried to find even a flicker of real worry. Nothing. Just mild irritation that I wasn't doing what I was supposed to. And for the first time, I didn't feel small under that disappointment. I felt awake. When we hung up, I sat in the dark, binder open on my lap, and whispered to myself, "I'm done." It didn't sound angry or dramatic. It sounded like truth, and the truth felt steady. But here's the thing about making a decision like that. Once you start waking up, you start noticing every tiny detail that used to slide past you. Like how Savannah posted a story that night, sitting at some rooftop bar with her friends, captioned, "My sister better not flake again." Like my collapse was a scheduling inconvenience. Or how Mom texted me 2 minutes later with, "You know how stressed your sister is. Try harder, Lauren. Try harder." After the hospital. After everything. I put my phone face down and stared at the ceiling, realizing something terrifying and freeing all at once. They weren't going to stop. Not until I made them. And somewhere deep inside me a small, steady voice answered, "Good, let's begin." I wasn't planning to go to Savannah's wedding. Seriously, I wasn't. I told myself I didn't care. that I'd spend that Saturday cleaning my apartment, or catching up on sleep, or maybe just sitting in silence like a person who's realized her whole identity has been built on everyone else's convenience. But the night before the wedding, while the binder lay open across my desk and my phone buzzed nonstop with reminder texts from Mom about Ethan's family expecting a tasteful gift, something inside me whispered, "You owe it to yourself to be seen at least once." And honestly, that was enough. So I ironed my only nice dress, navy, simple, no sparkles, and put it on while the sun was rising, wondering if I was out of my mind. By 10 a.m., I was standing outside the Briarwood Lake Resort, staring up at the place like it was some kind of shrine built out of my paychecks. It was the exact kind of venue Savannah dreamed about since she was 12. Funny thing is, back then, she used to say I'd be her maid of honor one day. Guess she didn't think maid was the part I ended up playing. Security at the entrance looked me up and down like I was a lost Uber Eats driver. "Name?" one of them asked. I gave it. Of course it wasn't on the list, not even under family. The guard shrugged like this happened all the time. "Sorry, ma'am, this is a private event." And maybe it was the lack of sleep or the leftover hostility from the oxy I'd been prescribed, but I let out a laugh so sharp the guard blinked. I pulled out my phone, opened the folder labeled Truth, and said, "Look, man, you can either let me in, or you can explain to the bride why her entire wedding is about to get an unscheduled fireworks show." The guard hesitated. Another came over. They whispered. They looked at my screen. And then they stepped aside. I didn't feel powerful walking through those doors. I felt steady. That quiet, grounded kind of steady you feel when you realize there's nothing left to lose. The ballroom was huge, stupidly huge, with crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed everything, white orchids everywhere like a bridal Pinterest board exploded. For a second, watching all those people sipping mimosas and taking selfies, I felt like an intruder in my own story. My family didn't notice at first. They rarely look for me, so why would they now? But then Savannah turned her head, mid-laugh, mid-showing off her engagement ring to some friend in a sparkly dress. Her smile froze. Her hand dropped. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. An inconvenient, uninvited ghost who had the audacity to breathe. She walked toward me in her silk robe, veil pinned loosely like a halo she didn't deserve. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. I shrugged. Thought I'd stop by. You know, since I apparently funded half the floral arrangements. Her jaw clenched so tight I heard her teeth grind. "You're ruining the energy," she whispered. Savannah and her obsession with energy. If only she'd spent half as much time working on her character. Before she could drag me outside or stage whisper something nasty, Ethan's mother approached us. A sweet, polite woman with perfect hair and the kind of forced optimism people develop from years of dealing with wealthy nonsense. "Oh, you must be Lauren. Savannah told us you've been having a difficult time lately." Difficult time. Cute rebranding. I smiled at her, polite but firm. "I'm feeling much better now, thank you." And I swear, Ethan's mom gave me a look. Quick, subtle, curious. Like she sensed something was off. Moms like her always do. Then the music changed. People started taking their seats for the ceremony. The officiant stood at the front, fussing with his notes. The bridal party lined up. Savannah turned to me one last time and said, "Listen, don't make this about you. Today is important." And for some reason, that sentence, "Don't make this about you," hit me harder than the collapse at work. I wasn't there to make anything about me. Everything had been about everyone except me for decades. When the ceremony music started, I walked down the aisle, not with the bridesmaids, but slowly, calmly, right down the center, like it was the most natural thing in the world. A ripple went through the crowd, confusion, curiosity, little whispers rising like wind in a cornfield. Savannah's eyes widened. Ethan stiffened. My mother, sitting in the second row wearing a dress I'm 90% sure I paid for, stood up and whispered, "Lauren, don't you dare." I didn't say a word. I just walked to the front, turned to face the crowd, and pulled my phone from my bag. I'd set up a little system the night before. Grouped contacts into wedding guests, pulled all the evidence into one scheduled push notification, synced it with a Bluetooth trigger in my pocket. Because if you're going to expose the truth, you may as well do it with style. The officiant cleared his throat, nervous but trying to stay professional. Ma'am, you can't. I only need 2 minutes, I said. My voice didn't shake, not once. And then you can all go back to pretending this wedding is built on love. Ethan frowned, glancing between Savannah and me. I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. Just a little. Enough to make Savannah panic. She reached out to grab my arm, but I stepped back. That's enough, she whispered. Stop being dramatic. And with that, I pressed the button. Immediately, every phone in that ballroom buzzed. 100 little screens lighting up all at once like fireflies. At first, people just looked confused. Then they started reading. And then the murmurs began. Louder, sharper, gasps. Someone dropped a champagne flute. A bridesmaid covered her mouth. A guy in the 3rd row muttered, "Holy shut." Because on those screens, every dollar I'd ever sent them, every guilt-tripping text, recordings of Mom calling me the reliable mule, recordings of Savannah joking I was basically her walking credit line, a screenshot of the lipstick message on my mirror, and finally, the photo of me in the ICU, still hooked to monitors. People looked at me, then at Savannah, then back at their phones like they weren't sure which reality to believe. Savannah lunged for my phone, but Ethan grabbed her wrist. "What is all this?" he asked, voice shaking. Not angry, not yet, just confused and scared in that way people get when their life stops making sense. Savannah stammered, It's taken out of context. Lauren is being extra. She always does this when she's jealous." "Jealous?" I repeated, blinking. "Of what exactly? Your debt? Your irresponsibility? Your inability to say thank you?" My tone wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. The room was so quiet you couldn't even hear the orchids rustle. Then Ethan's phone buzzed again. The second wave. This time it was a voicemail. Mom's voice saying, "She won't say no. Lauren never says no. She's too soft. Just push harder." Ethan froze like someone had unplugged him from reality. Slowly, he handed the phone to his mother, who looked horrified. Savannah kept whispering, "Stop it, stop it, stop it," like she could will the evidence away. And then, the moment I didn't expect, Ethan took off his wedding band and set it on the altar. "I can't marry someone who builds a life on lies," he said quietly. And for once, Savannah's face wasn't pretty. It twisted, rage, humiliation, disbelief, all crashing into each other. Mom rushed to the front, grabbed my arm and hissed, "You are sick. You need help. How dare you humiliate your family like this?" I looked at her, really looked, and realized I didn't feel afraid of her anymore. "I didn't humiliate anyone," I said. "I just stopped covering for you." The crowd parted automatically as I walked out, like they knew this wasn't my scene anymore. I could hear Savannah screaming my name behind me, Mom yelling, Ethan's mother comforting someone else recording everything like this was some wild reality TV moment. And maybe it was. But stepping out into the sunlight, that was the real moment. Because for the first time in my entire life, I felt free. In the days following the wedding disaster, my phone turned into a slot machine of chaos. Missed calls, angry voicemails, dramatic paragraphs from Mom, half apology, half accusation texts from Savannah, even a few messages from people I barely knew growing up in our small Ohio town. It was wild. You'd think I'd feel guilty or overwhelmed or something, but honestly, all I felt was quiet. Like the kind of quiet you get after a thunderstorm wrecks your backyard. Mess everywhere, but the air finally feels breathable. I kept my phone on silent. I didn't block anyone, though. I didn't need to. People eventually get tired of yelling when they realize you're simply not listening anymore. What surprised me most wasn't my mother's rage or Savannah's desperate attempts to paint herself as the victim. It was my father. The man spent most of my life floating in and out like a tired shadow, nodding along to whatever Mom said, never standing up for me, never standing up for himself either. His message was different. "I didn't know it was that bad. I'm sorry." And for the first time I heard regret in his voice instead of indifference. Still, regret doesn't erase years of silence. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, just out of exhaustion. Sometimes you're too tired to hold someone's redemption arc for them. Meanwhile, the fallout hit Savannah like a freight train. Briarwood Lake Resort demanded the remaining balance for the venue because emotional disruption is not grounds for cancellation. Her influencer brand dropped her after the videos from the wedding hit TikTok. And from what I heard through Aunt Clara, Ethan quietly moved out of town for a bit, probably to breathe without someone manipulating the oxygen out of his lungs. Savannah kept posting cryptic quotes on Instagram. Betrayal hurts the deepest. Family wounds last forever. God knows my truth. Before finally going offline altogether. A part of me wondered if she finally saw the damage she'd done, or if she was just embarrassed the world saw her without filters. Knowing her? Probably the latter. Mom, on the other hand, doubled down. She called every relative she could, spinning a story about how I'd lost control, how I'd been emotionally unstable since childhood, how she'd always tried her best to help me. Funny how her version of help always looked like me wiring money at 2 a.m., or taking blame for problems I didn't cause. Aunt Clara called me the day after, voice soft in that way older women in the Midwest do when they're trying not to cry. "Honey," she said, "you didn't break that family. You just stopped letting them break you." That sentence did something to me. It felt like someone finally turned on the lights in a room I'd been stumbling through my whole life. About a week later, I made the decision I should have made years ago. I packed my things and left. Not dramatically, not with a "you'll never see me again" monologue, just quiet, steady, deliberate. I moved to Cincinnati, rented a small loft with brick walls and decent sunlight, and adopted a dog from a shelter. A three-legged mutt named Taco, who instantly decided I was his entire world. That dog healed things in me I didn't even know were wounded. I also quit my old job at the logistics company and accepted a position at a smaller, family-owned warehouse in town. Less money, but better people. The kind of place where folks ask about your day without expecting anything in return. Where nobody keeps score. Where my boss, a guy named Harry, has a habit of dropping off homemade chili at everyone's desk on Fridays. It felt normal. And for once, normal didn't feel boring. It felt like safety. There were moments, small ones, that made me realize how deep the damage ran. Like the first time someone offered to cover my shift so I could rest, and I instinctively prepared myself to owe them something huge. Or when a coworker casually asked if I wanted coffee, and I panicked because I assumed there'd be strings attached. Trauma is weird like that. It sneaks into the quiet moments. But step by step, I learned to let people be kind without searching for the trapdoor underneath. And then there was the day I ran into Miss Reynolds, my old high school English teacher, at a bookstore downtown. She recognized me instantly, hugged me like I mattered, and said, "You always had a fire in you. I'm glad you finally let it burn in the right direction." I almost cried on the spot, because she was the first adult who ever believed I was more than what my family decided I should be. I didn't completely cut ties with everyone, though. Dad reached out again, this time with no excuses, just honesty. "I should have protected you," he said. We talked, slowly, carefully, like two people trying to rebuild a bridge that had been left to rot. He didn't defend Mom. He didn't defend Savannah. He didn't defend himself. He just listened. And honestly, that was enough for now. Mom tried to visit once, showed up at my new place unannounced, acting like nothing had happened. She walked in with that familiar tone, telling me I should help Savannah rebuild her life, because family doesn't abandon each other. I stood there, holding Taco's leash, staring at her like she was a stranger selling something I didn't want. "I didn't abandon the family," I said. "I just stopped abandoning myself." She didn't like that answer. She left in a storm. And for the first time, I didn't chase her. Healing isn't pretty. It's not soft music and scented candles. Sometimes it's crying in your car after buying groceries, or sitting on the floor with a dog who licks your hand when your chest gets tight, or realizing you don't have anybody to impress anymore, and that's both terrifying and freeing. A few weeks later, Harry invited me to a backyard BBQ. I almost didn't go. Social anxiety is a clingy little monster. But I showed up anyway. And there, between the picnic tables and cornhole boards, someone made me laugh so hard, sweet tea came out of my nose. His name was Calvin. Soft-spoken, easy smile. The kind of man who actually listens when you talk instead of waiting for his turn. We ended up sitting under a maple tree for an hour, talking about music, heartbreak, and how Ohio weather can't make up its damn mind. He didn't flirt. He didn't pity me. He didn't ask for my past. He just existed beside me, quietly, respectfully. And that felt like the safest thing in the world. That night, when I got home, Taco curled up at my feet while I ate leftover ribs, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt something bloom in my chest. Not joy. Joy is too big, too bright. Something smaller, softer. Hope. I didn't want much. I wasn't chasing some Instagram-worthy life. I just wanted peace. And it felt like maybe, just maybe, I was finally building a life where peace wasn't a luxury. I used to think rebuilding your life would feel like some big cinematic moment, like you'd wake up one morning to birds singing, the sun hitting your face in that perfect Instagram glow, and suddenly you'd feel healed. Turns out, healing is way quieter. It's sitting in a new apartment where the walls don't echo with anyone else's expectations. It's drinking coffee that actually stays warm because you're not rushing to fix someone else's problem. It's Taco snoring next to me while I journal about things I want, not things I owe. And honestly, that's enough. More than enough. One Sunday morning, I found myself walking through the local farmer's market, something I never let myself do before because weekends used to belong to my family's emergencies. The air smelled like kettle corn and fresh peaches. Little kids ran around with balloon animals, and old couples held hands like the world wasn't constantly falling apart. I didn't know why, but for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Not because I was useful, not because I was needed, just because I existed. That alone almost made me tear up by the tomato stand like some emotional Hallmark character. I bumped into Calvin there. He was carrying a bag of apples and wearing a baseball cap backward, looking way younger than he actually is. He smiled when he saw me, the kind of smile that doesn't expect anything afterward. We talked about nothing and everything. How the fall weather in Ohio lasts approximately 8 minutes. How Taco acts like he pays rent. How he couldn't cook to save his life but still tried. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. It was safe. And safe felt luxurious in a way I'd never experienced. Later that day, I sat on my balcony with Taco and watched the sun go down behind the city skyline. My phone buzzed again. Not with drama this time, but with a message from Aunt Clara. Proud of you, sweetheart. Keep choosing yourself. I don't know why that simple sentence broke me open a little. Maybe because it was the first time someone in my family ever encouraged me to put myself first. Maybe because I spent 32 years believing my worth was tied to how much I could give away. And now here I was, giving myself back piece by piece. Don't get me wrong, there were days I questioned everything. Days when the guilt crawled back in like an old habit. Days when I wondered if I'd been too harsh, too dramatic, too extra, like Savannah always said. But every time I felt myself slipping into those old patterns, something grounded me. Like the memory of waking up in the ICU alone, or the lipstick message on my mirror, or Mom's voice calling me reliable, like it was a compliment when she really meant useful. Those reminders weren't bitterness, they were clarity. They kept me anchored to the truth. I didn't leave a family. I left a cage. A few weeks after the move, Dad visited my new place. Not unannounced this time. He knocked softly, like he wasn't sure he deserved to be on the other side of the door. We talked on the balcony while Taco tried to climb into his lap. He apologized again, this time without excuses, without blaming Mom, without pretending things were complicated when they really weren't. He said he wished he'd noticed sooner, that he wished he'd protected me, that he was trying now. And even though part of me wanted to stay guarded, another part, the tired, lonely, hopeful part, let him in just a little. Not enough to rewrite the past, but enough to start a different future. Mom didn't reach out again, and I stopped waiting for her to. People love to talk about forgiveness like it's some moral badge you have to earn, but the truth is, forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it just means letting go so the anger doesn't rot inside you. I forgave her quietly, privately, and moved on. She never has to know. That peace belongs to me, not her. One night, while I was reading on the couch, Calvin texted, "You doing okay?" Simple, no pressure, no expectations. And for some reason, that meant more to me than any bouquet of apology flowers or long speeches ever could. I told him I was doing better. He sent back a thumbs up and a joke about how Taco probably runs the house now. I laughed. Out loud. And it hit me. I hadn't laughed like that in years. Not the polite, empty kind. A real, full one. The kind my family never made room for. I ended that night sitting by my window, watching city lights flicker like tiny stories happening in every apartment. And I thought about my own story. How it started messy and painful. How it twisted through years of obligation and exhaustion. How it nearly ended in a hospital bed with no one by my side. And how somehow, against every odd, it led me here. To a life that actually feels like mine. So here's the part I wish someone had told me a long time ago. Family isn't the people who share your last name. It's the people who share your peace. Love shouldn't feel like a receipt. Loyalty shouldn't feel like a leash. And choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Now when my phone lights up with a number I don't want to answer, I do something I never thought I could. I turn it off. I pick up Taco. I sit on my balcony and breathe. And I choose myself, every single time. Because the truth is simple. The life I built after the storm is quiet, small, imperfect. But finally mine. When everything finally settled, I realized the loudest lesson came from the quiet afterward. For so long, I thought love meant endurance, that family was something you protected at all costs, even when it drained you dry. But life has a way of showing you the truth in the gentlest, and sometimes harshest ways. You can't pour from an empty cup. And you sure as hell can't save people who only come around when they need something from you. What happened with my family taught me that silence is often the first chain in a toxic cycle. The moment you speak up, the moment you draw a boundary, the world shifts. Maybe not comfortably, maybe not cleanly, but honestly. And honesty has a way of setting you free. I learned that respect isn't earned through sacrifice. It's earned through self-awareness. That blood is thicker than water is only true when the people in your life actually show up for you. Otherwise, it's just a saying folks hide behind when they don't want to face their own behavior. Sometimes you've got to step back and let people face the consequences of seeds they planted. Like my grandmother used to say, you reap what you sow, eventually. Most of all, I learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. And once you finally say, enough, you realize how heavy the world was on your shoulders, and how light it feels without it. They reached out weeks later. I forgave them, but this time, on my terms, my peace, my boundaries. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Share your own experience if you've ever walked away from something that hurt more than it healed. Hit like if this gave you something to think about. And subscribe for more stories that dig deep into life, justice, and the human heart. Wishing you calm evenings, warm mornings, and the courage to choose yourself every single time.